Hear these words from John 10, verses 1 through 10. Very truly I tell you, anyone who does not enter the sheepfold by the gate, but climbs in by another way is a thief or a bandit. The one who enters by the gate is the shepherd of the sheep. The gatekeeper opens the gate for him, and the sheep hear his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all his own, he goes ahead of them, and the sheep follow him because they know his voice. They will not follow a stranger, but they will run from him because they do not know the voice of strangers. Jesus used this figure of speech with them, but they did not understand what he was saying to them. So, again, Jesus said to them, very truly I tell you, I am the gate of the sheep. All who came before me are thieves and bandits, but the sheep did not listen to them. I am the gate. Whoever enters by me will be saved and will come in and go out and find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. This is the gospel of our Lord. When I was in 7th grade, which it was a very long time ago, at the end of the summer, I took all the money I had earned that summer helping bale hay and walking bean fields to cut the weeds out of the rows. There was a way people did this before we sprayed Roundup on everything. And with all that money I had earned, I bought from my grandfather Hawkins 2 Cheviot ewes and a buck. Now, Cheviots aren't the biggest sheep. They're small, but they are tough. They come from the Cheviot Hills up in Northumbria originally. And gradually, over the last of my junior high and high school years, I built that little herd I had up to about 30 sheep, which I sold the wool and occasionally lambs and even more occasionally meat. It was one of the ways I paid my way through college. And every morning at home, I would get up, put my clothes on, unlock the gate to the pasture, walk down to the barn where those sheep spent safely shut up at night. I would unlock the door so they could come out onto the pasture. And then every evening, no matter how tired I was or what else I really wanted to do, I went back down to that pasture. I drove the sheep back into the barn, checked that they were all there, and shut the door behind them. I shut them in every night and I let them out every morning. It was the only way to keep them safe. Now, Central Illinois, rural Central Illinois, is not exactly overrun with packs of wolves or dangerous animals, but there were occasional predators. Occasionally, there was a coyote. More frequently, dogs from neighbors could get into small herds of sheep. They didn't want to kill them and eat them. What they did was, it was a game, they would run them to death till their hearts just ran out of steam. In Psalm 23, God is described as a shepherd who protects his flock from danger, leads it to nourishing pastures, wraps it in a cloak of safety, heals injuries and wounds. And when Jesus in John's Gospel describes himself as a good shepherd, he and his listeners probably had in the back of their minds Psalm 23 that Don read so beautifully this morning. Protecting sheep, keeping them safe, meant keeping them protected at night, because that's when predators lurked close by. Dusk descends, shepherd leads his flock into a sheep pen, which was in the Middle East and in parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland and Scotland, was usually a loosely piled stone fence. Stone in the Middle East is quite plentiful. Trees, not so much so. It's actually interesting when we call Joseph a carpenter, it's just as likely he was a stonemason, because wood was not really used to build houses except for the rafters that held the roof up. So there was no wooden gate or barn door to shut up in Jesus' time. The shepherd didn't go back to his cozy, warm house and comfortable bed for the night like I did. Instead, the shepherd himself or herself became the gate. Bedding down for the night, the shepherd's own body stretched across the opening between the stone fence of the sheepfold. The shepherd literally became the gate. That's what Jesus is alluding to here. And the flock could sleep secure, knowing they were protected not just by a gate and some stones, but by the shepherd himself or herself, who lay his body between them and potential danger. It's what Jesus means when he says, shepherd lays down his life for the sheep, puts his own life, his own body, between danger and the enclosed sheep. Who can't understand the appeal of this image across the ages? We may not have sheep, but we know about wanting to feel safe. Who among us doesn't worry about safety? Feeling safe, along with food and drink, is one of our basic needs as human beings. When we feel safe, we're not anxious about being hurt, either physically or emotionally. When we're in safe space, we can relax. Our fears can loosen their grip on us. But is that expectation to feel safe in our world just something naive and Pollyannish? I don't know, you need to tell you that the world and our existence in it often feels unsafe. Just watch the news. Climate, personal health, deep disappointments, inflation, war. There's so much in our world and in our personal lives that feed our insecurity about our safety, that cause us to imagine all the things that might happen but may never happen. You know, Mark Twain once quipped, "I've lived through some terrible things in my life, most of which didn't happen." Psalm 23 and John asks us to replace our worst case scenario imagining, which can easily snowball into a frightening set of what-ifs, scenarios that make us feel very unsafe and insecure in our world and in our lives. To replace that with a conviction that our lives, the ultimate truth about our lives is we are held safe in divine arms stronger than our own. Yes, the worst probably will happen to all of us. Some of us it already has. Yet we face it and we discover that we have inner resources, God-given resources in us to cope and rise above it and through it. As Paul's Easter readings from a few weeks ago, where he talks about the resurrection in 1 Corinthians 15 say, he says, death has lost its sting. When I was listening to that Sunday morning, singing, Christ the Lord is risen today, I thought, it's lost its sting. Its sting. Notice Paul doesn't say, death and suffering aren't going to happen to you. It says they'd lost their sting, their ability to hurt us. Yes, we still die. We still suffer. Our lives are still insecure. But the sting of that lets those things control how we relate and think and act, has been pulled out like the sting of a bee. The probability of pain does not equate a meaningless march toward nothing. That's the fear the Bible tells us over and over again we need not have. Though I walk through the valley of shadows, you're with me. Your rod and your staff comfort me. Eddie Hilson and Anne Frank lived just a few blocks from each other in Nazi-occupied Amsterdam. Both of them were Jews. Both of them kept journals. And both of them eventually were swept up in raids and carried off to detention camps and ultimately to their death. Hilsum's diary is a little different than Anne Frank's. Her diary chronicles her time at the Westerbroek transit camp, which is where Jews were taken and put before they were transferred on to Auschwitz and other extermination camps. And later, those diaries and letters were gathered into a book called A Life Interrupted. In it, she describes how amid enormous fear and danger and uncertainty and lack of safety for herself and for all she loved, she retained a deep sense of feeling safe, of being held. In one passage, she writes this: the jasmine shrub behind my house has been completely ruined by the rains and the storms of the last few days. Its beautiful white blossoms are floating about in muddy black pools on the ground. But somewhere inside me, the jasmine's beauty continues to blossom undisturbed, just as profusely and delicately as it ever did. Oh God, I bring to you not only my tears and my forebodings in this stormy, gray place I am, I even bring you my scented jasmine. We can either see our lives as like those of white jasmine blossoms, beautiful and beloved, and cast into the mud, or we can choose to see them as still beautiful and beloved, even while storm-tossed and mud-splattered. It's a choice which we choose to see. Notice in our passage Jesus calls his sheep by name and leads them out. The sheep can't spend their life in the sheepfold safety. They have to venture out into the pasture where predators lurk, where poisonous plants hide amid the sweet alfalfa. Not even the sheep's life is all safety and security, even with a shepherd. Life is mostly about radical uncertainty. Living requires risk and suffering. The risk of love, the risk of trying something new and not getting it right the first time, the risk of unexpected disappointment and hurt. Notice that while the sheep recover in safety each night, they also go through the gate into the pasture. They don't face the potential predators and poisonous weeds alone. The shepherd calls them out into the riskiness of living in a world that's not always safe and certain. But out there, we know the voice of the one who walks with us through every dark valley and sets a place for us by still waters. That voice actually probably sounds a lot like a voice you know. A family member, a friend, maybe a stranger who just happens to be a caring person. It's through their voice that God's voice always speaks, through our voices that God always speaks. John Boyle was a World War II veteran, and he was one time head of the clinical pastoral education division at the Texas Medical Center in Houston. And he was a World War II veteran. I knew him briefly in Chicago before he retired from Fourth Presbyterian Church. And he often told a story about how in World War II his unit had taken up a position in an area that was being quietly infiltrated by German troops. In the middle of the pitch black night, moonless, they were told to secure their things and to proceed silently, single file to safety, each soldier holding on to the ammo belt of the one in front of them. At one point, Boyle stumbled, lost his footing, fell into a depression, lost his grip on the person ahead of him. The one behind him lost the grip on him too. There he was, suddenly alone, in the dark, left behind in what was becoming enemy territory. Mandated not to make a sound lest they alert the German troops around them. He couldn't even cry out for help. And then, as he sat there completely undone, he felt a hand grab his shoulder in the dark, and a voice in a very low whisper in his ear call him by name. John, it's me, George. And Boyle said, I knew my shepherd had found me. And he called me by name. I had heard his voice. Boyle said, through the rest of the war, the people in his unit, George and he, were all shepherds to one another. When we stumble in the dark, when we feel frightened and insecure, and that the world and our lives have suddenly become unsafe, sometimes we can't cry out for help either. And that's the moment we need to hear a voice that knows our name. And that's what we do for one another. Our Good Shepherd insists we step out and take risks to shepherd those around us who need to hear a divine voice through the dark, and to feel the touch of a warm hand through our touch, to visit the sick, to sit with the sorrowful, to feed the hungry, to tutor a child, to write a note, and should, as we shepherd each other through life's valleys of darkness, or sit at a table and hold their hands in the presence of all that threatens them most. May we not worry about the risk of losing a part of ourself in doing so. For it's by caring for others that there's a very good chance we won't become lost in ourselves. Amen.